we really need the agape, unconditional love, because otherwise we love who is like us, who thinks like us, who eats like us, who smells like us. But only the agape love, the unconditional love of Jesus can only move us in that direction.
Jüngermacher.
Hey und herzlich willkommen zu dieser Folge des Jüngermacher Podcasts. Ich bin Daniel und heute geht es darum, wie durch ein paar einfache und machbare Schritte ein ganz bestimmter Teil der Vision vom Reich Gottes Realität werden kann. Nämlich, dass Menschen verschiedener Kulturen im Namen Jesu gemeinschaftlich ihren Glauben leben. Für mich persönlich ist Integrität ein sehr hoher Wert, also dass ich lebe, was ich rede. Und deswegen ist mir für dieses Projekt Jüngermacher sehr wichtig, dass ich nicht nur möglichst schlau über Jüngerschaft rede, sondern tatsächlich versuche, sie ernsthaft täglich zu leben. Und deswegen möchte ich ebenso im Podcast über Jüngerschaft nicht als ein Gedankengebäude sprechen, sondern über das echte Leben. Ich möchte, dass ihr Zuhörer ganz praktische, umsetzbare Gedanken mitnehmen könnt. Und deswegen freue ich mich so sehr über diese Folge heute. Denn heute haben wir nicht nur eine ganze Podcast-Folge für praktische Ideen über Jüngerschaft, sondern mit ihr auch ein ganzes Buch voller praktischer Ideen über Jüngerschaft. Mein Gesprächspartner für heute ist Theo Visser. Er kommt aus den Niederlanden, weswegen diese Folge heute mal in Englisch sein wird. Er wohnt nahe Rotterdam und hat dort vor einigen Jahren eine interkulturelle Gemeinde gegründet. Mit seiner Erfahrung daraus hat er anderen Gründern geholfen, dass innerhalb von 10 Jahren 30 weitere interkulturelle Gemeinden gegründet werden konnten. Über seinen Weg hat er ein Buch geschrieben, das wir mit Jüngermacher nun auf Deutsch herausgebracht haben. Es hat den Titel Interkulturelle Gemeinschaften gründen und ist voll von anwendbaren Ideen für deinen Dienst. Es geht Theo nicht einfach darum, Menschen aus fremden Kulturen mit Jesus zu erreichen. Es geht ihm ganz grundsätzlich darum, Menschen zu erreichen, also missional zu sein. Und es geht ihm darum, alle Menschen in unserem Umfeld zu erreichen. Und dazu gehören dann automatisch und auch mal eine ganze Menge Menschen, die einfach anders sind als wir. Weswegen das Ganze also interkulturell wird. Im Buch geht es darum, wie du Menschen mit verschiedenen Hintergründen kennenlernen kannst, wie du ihnen das Evangelium bringen kannst, wie ihr gemeinsame Jüngerschaft leben und euch multiplizieren könnt. Das Buch erhältst du exklusiv über unsere Webseite jünger-macher.de/Angebote, Jünger mit UE. Es kostet nur 10 Euro als Taschenbuch inklusive Versand und ist auch als E-Book für 5 Euro erhältlich. Hier ist mein Gespräch mit Theo. So Theo, or Theo, I need to say, welcome to our Jüngermacher podcast. Great to have you.
Thank you. It's a great privilege, Daniel, to be with you.
Yeah, that's the first one in English, but I'm looking forward to talk to you and hear more about you. Today we want to talk about a book that you've written, Planting Intercultural Missional Communities. That's the English title, and the German title is Interkulturelle Gemeinschaften gründen. Mm-hmm. But more so, we want to talk about the ideas and the heart behind it. So we have talked about intercultural churches on this podcast before. We've talked about being missional on this podcast before. But both seem rather to be kind of niche topics in the church world. Mm-hmm. And now we've combined them, which would make them even more niche. Yeah. So my question is, where's the intersection of being intercultural and being missional, and how is that important to us?
Wow. Yeah, Daniel, I love that question because in my life, the two values are really important. To be missional and to be intercultural. And if I have to choose for the two, then the missional goes first.
Right.
So people often look to me like Theo is always into the intercultural church planting, but that is because of also of the many missional opportunities.
Yeah.
And of course, because Jesus said, make all ethnicities my disciples. So he combined it, in the Great Commission. So then I think it's a good idea if we combine it too. So
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a pretty tough question. There's so much in the Bible about the church being intercultural and bringing together many, many different people, yet we don't see that happening that much in the church, at least in where we live, right? So Why is that? What's your take on that?
People sometimes say that the church comes 20 or 30 years behind the world around them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think at least in the Netherlands, that's often the case. Like the church is not known for its innovative character in general. And
Yeah.
I think it just takes time, and it's not familiar. Like we have been used to doing church in a certain way,
Mm.
and to plant a truly intercultural church is something which is quite different from the way that we are used to do church. And we all stick to what is common and what we know and what is safe and our comfort zones. And I think an intercultural church is an not always comfortable to put it like that. And
Ye-
honestly, I think
mm.
when we are all honest, we all have some level of ethnocentric behavior. We
Sure.
all think that somehow we are superior. We will never say it, but we think that many of our customs are better than those of
Mm.
others. So it requires also a lot of humbleness. And let's be honest, even Peter himself, after all he had seen from Jesus, after he spoke at Pentecost,
Right.
he needed
Mm.
a vision from heaven and a sheet that came down and God grabbing him and at his hairs to really make him clear what it means to be intercultural. So, we can be patient with ourselves, right?
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I mean, I always wonder. I think I would really like the church to be the innovator with those kinds of values, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, and 20, 30 years behind is not being remotely being close to being the innovator, right? It's you're far behind.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's how it works. And that's why I think that the church will be blessed so much with a bit more balance, with pioneering spirit at one side. And also, of course, we need the traditions and the church of the ages. We stand on their shoulders. We honor that. We honor that tradition.
Mm.
At the same time, we want to be innovative, and mostly because we want to catch the opportunities for the kingdom to grow. And that's what you see in every revival too. Like people did new things. John Wesley, he left the church. He spoke outside. It was a scandal at his time,
Yeah.
to do it that way.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think we need that pioneering spirit in our churches a bit more in Europe.
Yeah, right. I think the point is what we are trying to achieve, what we are hoping for, that there's a church who's like vibrant and proclaiming the gospel and reaching people, right?
Absolutely.
We won't get that if
No.
we only plant new churches.
No.
There's no way. But the new planted churches are a way for innovation to happen, and this innovation it catches fire with the established churches as well. I've seen it a lot of times.
Yeah.
And honestly, quite often they are doing it even better because they have more resources, and they just had the chance to lean back
Mhm.
and watch first and don't make all the mistakes the church plants made, right? So, yeah.
Absolutely. I think it makes sense to understand that all throughout history, if you see the church as a circle, in the heart of the circle, there's always been the traditional church, the church of the ages, where much of the real work is done.
Hmm.
And then you also have something at the edges, the renewal movements.
Right.
And often they work one at the expense of the other.
Hmm.
But if you see the strength of both and know how to combine them both, I think then we have a real strong force because we understand we need each other. We need the renewal movement, but we also need the inner core.
Yeah, right.
Both of them will be imbalanced if we stick to one of them.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think the point is we as Christians, we are a movement, right? We are not an organization. And a movement happens much more through these kinds of these kinds of ways. And there's not like a top down hierarchy. So we need to look how we bring all of those things together. Yeah.
That's exactly why we have started with what we are doing with those
Yeah.
missional communities. And to come back on your question, like why is it so relevant and how do they belong to each other? Like if nowadays in a multicultural society you start a new church, uh, you might even just jump into becoming a multi-ethnic church, or I wouldn't call that an intercultural church, but accidentally. Why? Because people from other nations and migrants tend to be more open to the gospel.
Yeah.
And I remember when I started doing this, and I met this guy from Sri Lanka, and he asked me come to my room and in my refugee camp and tell me more of the Bible, and I did that, and his wife listened in, and after some months, the whole family came to faith. I'd never seen that among the Dutch, you know?
Yeah.
But there's an openness among migrants that is just, I think it's an opportunity that God gives us. And, we shouldn't be blind. And a multicultural society has its limitations and dangers. But for the kingdom of God perspective, it also has huge opportunities to reach out people from all nations. And don't forget also, what happens if those people from other nations come to faith here in Germany, and if we equip them, what it might mean if they go back to their home country,
Yes.
they are much better missionaries than we can ever be
Yeah.
as Dutch and as Germans, because they understand the culture, they know everything. And I have seen a couple of great examples of that, of people who
Yeah.
just caught a burden for their own nation, and they have been in such fruitful ministry as I can only imagine. I cannot not even dream of that. And if you look to Germany, like 30% of all Germans nowadays are migrants, 25 million. You
Yeah.
know, it's impossible to not also include them in the church and
Right.
stay a white church. When Germany has become so multicultural.
Yeah. Yeah.
So whether we like it or not, we better
Yeah.
go with the flow because it's who we are.
Yeah.
The church is also called to be a counter community where we don't follow all
Yes.
the xenophobia, all the fear for strangers, but the Bible turns it around and says we are called to be philoxenia. That's love for strangers. That is the biblical word for hospitality.
Yeah.
So instead of xenophobes, we should be philoxenia, hospitable to strangers. So the church is called to be a counterculture where we don't allow ourselves to be ruled by fear, but by love. And I
Yeah.
know that's a challenge, and I know that's not easy,
Yeah.
but the spirit of love is dwelling in us, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's kind of a theory I was working in the back of my mind while you were talking. It might come down to finding love for people again.
Mm-hmm.
I think, like, even the question I asked in the first place, being intercultural and being missional, the idea might be to really love people again, because if we do love people again, it doesn't matter where they come from, and it doesn't matter where they are right now. I'm going to reach out for them, and I'm going to connect with them.
Yeah. But it's not just the human love, Daniel. We really need the agape,
Yeah,
unconditional love.
right.
Because otherwise we love who is like us, who thinks like us, who
Yeah.
eats like us, who smells like us. But only the agape love, the unconditional love of Jesus can only move us in that direction.
Yeah. So how have you seen people renew their agape?
Yeah, I think that often God needs to open our eyes, and often I think He needs us to be shocked, or just see it, or things happen. Like in my case, I wasn't at all, I would say, qualified to start doing intercultural ministry. I was finishing my study theology, and then a roommate told me, there's this first wave of refugees in the Netherlands. Would you come and work for free with a support group among refugees? This was completely out of my comfort zone. And it was a very shocking question. And only after praying for it and God talking clearly to me about it, I was ready to do it. But naturally, I would never have chosen for it.
Right, I see. So If you're talking about the time before you were planting a church with the refugee ministry, you told me that you had three main problems when you worked there. The first one is people got saved, but discipling them was hard. The second one is there was a lack of community. And the third one is that ethnic churches started to form. So when you planted your church later on, what did you do to overcome these challenges?
Yeah. Now, I first honestly want to say that what I did was not always the best example. And it's really true if I say that I made every possible mistake in pioneering. So I wouldn't say that, wow, then we started and then, we found the Holy Grail immediately.
Yeah.
But we really bumped into ourselves, into the situation. We learned the hard way. But then, for example, that first question that you mentioned about discipling, like we had no idea how to disciple a Muslim. And I remember that once I told a Muslim who had come to faith, now you are under grace, when he asked me, how many times do I need to pray per day? So I said, you are now under grace, so there's no need. When you feel prompted, you can do it. Later he told me, Theo, it would have been much more helpful if you have told me, you are under grace, but it's still wise to have a rhythm like Daniel did 3 times a day, And if I would not only tell him to do that, but if I would model it with him, Because I come from a background that we often think if we teach people things, then they are going to do it. If they read a book, if we get some information, if we send them a podcast, that's it.
Right.
But in most cultures of the world, things are not learned by what is taught, but by what is caught, by what people see and experience. Or in other words, it's not the orthodoxes, the teachings and the doctrines that will do it, but the orthopraxis, what is called by your lifestyle. And discipleship has to do with a lifestyle and inviting people into my life that they can see from me what I do, and then they can apply it, And I remember once it felt so awkward when a friend of mine from another culture, he said, Theo, I want to know how you make your sermons. But instead of me allowing him to tell me how to do it, he said, I want to sit in your room and I will want to watch you making a sermon. And, it felt really uncomfortable. But I think he learned much more of that than when I was going to tell him how I prepare a sermon.
Yeah, interesting.
So, that's a way of life. Discipleship is involving people into your life. It has to do with the other point too, community. And it's, it's so different from what we are used to do. And honestly, I've also seen in the Netherlands and Germany many Christians frustrated, like the migrants came with the migrant wave. We welcomed them, we baptized them, and then they were gone.
Right.
And, that's partly also because they take advantage of us. Let's be honest about it. But maybe it's also partly because we make babies, and when we have babies, we put them out on the street and think they will be raised automatically.
Yeah, exactly.
So we also have to blame ourselves. Like, how do we do discipleship with them?
Right. So that's actually a pretty interesting point, because I do have an actual baby at home right now. So my son, he is 5 months old. And I a few weeks ago, I told my wife, imagine, so the Bible uses the picture of babies grow up to be kids and teenagers and adults, right? And the Bible uses this picture for spiritual maturing, right? Imagine that we have people who come to faith, who are spiritual babies, and how we treat them, how we leave them alone. And imagine now leaving our baby alone. It's horrible, right? But that's what we do spiritually so often.
That's the problem. And that's a huge problem. And when we don't learn how to change it, it's almost cruel then to have babies.
It is. Yeah. And I think maybe even to the point where we raise them to be like teenagers, so they are barely able to support themselves. But beyond that, there's not too much. We don't teach them how to take care of other people.
Absolutely.
But I think that's the point that you were saying. It's we need to bring them into our lives and share our lives with them, and we can just teach them. I think that's a big reason why people stop at the certain stage of maturity. They stop at the point until where we can teach them, and they don't go further, because for the next step we need to be living with them actually.
Yeah, so true. So
Yeah.
true, Daniel.
Yeah. So what have you learned about discipleship in an intercultural setting that you didn't know before you were in the cultural setting?
Yeah, I already mentioned your second point about community, and
Yeah.
I think that is a big one. Like
Yeah.
in the Western world, when people have a bi-weekly Bible study group with some other Christians, they don't have even a meal. They just come together after the meal. And they say, wow, we are pretty intense in community, we really do well. And if I tell that to a friend from a warm culture, he laughs, and he say, is that community? It's not remotely close to what we mean with community at all.
Right.
So, we have to deal with that. Like, community life is different. And, we also have to be honest. We live in the Western world. We cannot match those standards, that's
Right.
reasonable.
Yeah.
But we might need to find a way in between, by which we learn in another way to relate to people and to welcome them in our hearts, in our homes, and then also in the cell groups, I would say. And then maybe the fourth point is then in the church service.
Right.
Actually, that's not from myself. I stole that from David Kreuker.
Yeah. I think we might have talked about this on his podcast last year. Yeah. Yeah. So what's with the third issue you had, the ethnic churches that started to form? How did you overcome that?
Yeah. Now, I really understand when people come to Germany freshly from another nation, that they need a place where they can still meet with their own people. And I even think from a missional perspective, like they need to meet Jesus in the rope of their own culture as much as possible. So if you can read an Iranian in Farsi, and he can hear some Farsi songs and eat some Iranian Persian food, I think that will be the best way.
Yeah, sure.
So we use this picture of the wheel, and on the rim of the wheel, then we have this ethnic communities. And in the center, we have a Sunday celebration. And we always say to people, like, if they come from another background, so first let them enter the kingdom into one of those communities. And when they are part of the kingdom, let them grow to the center. And first of all, the center is Christ. And that's just like with a wheel. The closer the spokes come to the center of the wheel, the closer they come to each other.
Right.
So that's why I say first the missional value, help them to help them to come into the kingdom of God. When they are in the kingdom, then help them to learn from each other and be one body of Christ together. I would say for second generation, it's a bit different. Then you can start with mixed groups, and you don't need to do that. You don't need a specific ethnic group. So if you are a second generation person, you can meet with, other teenagers from your own age.
Right.
That's not a big problem. But I think doing that really offers an opportunity once for this homogeneous place where you can meet the same kind of people like you are. We call that bonding, bringing the same kind of people together. And then the second step is bridging, building the connections, building the relationships, helping people to become friends. And I think, that we help ethnic churches if we bring that to the table, because they all have two problems. The first is they easily lose their second generation because they are in between the cultures.
Right.
And when they live in Germany, they sometimes feel more German than they feel Arab or Iraqi. So I think we help them. And, the second problem that they often have is that they are mostly relevant for their own people, but they are not that relevant for their host community. So they find it hard to bless Germany. And I don't think that's for the long run the way to go.
Interesting.
So we might need some ethnic churches in the beginning phases, but please let's not stop there, and let's go the next step, because it's just, first of all, a biblical principle. But second, there's so much blessing in doing it and practicing it.
So how do you build those bridges?
Yeah, there are so many ways to do that. Like in a Sunday service, for example, you can take a song from Urdu. If you have some Pakistanis in your church, and you translate that song into German. My wife runs a ministry which is Songs to Serve, and she does that. And then it's already there on the website. It's easy for musicians to learn it. So you don't only translate the German songs into Urdu, but you also do it the other way around. So now you can celebrate together the beauty of diversity. But still, if you only do that, you can watch each other from a distance and go home unchanged. And I think the best way is you help people to become friends. Like, one simple example is we have used the 4x2 project. What does it mean? 2 people, a couple, for example, say, let's meet for a year 4 times in our house. And when you come in our house, we cook a traditional dish. We tell you a bit of the nation where we come from. We show you a video and show you some pictures. And we tell you some stories of our background. And next time, we do it with someone from another culture, And we only do it 4 times. Now, if you do that, you come into each other's house, you hear the stories, you see when people get tears into their eyes. I can tell you, Daniel, those kind of things, those kind of small ideas, they help a lot to really understand, listen, feel, and come to another level of community and a relationship in your local church.
Oh yeah, I can imagine that. That sounds wonderful, actually. Yeah. Great. So, how does a church? Let me phrase that another way. What's the difference between an intercultural church and a church with intercultural people?
Yeah, I love that question. We have this picture of the soup, the buffet, and the salad. And that shows, like, if you have, let's say, an international church, a church with many migrants, but when you go there, you don't see the distinctives of the culture where they come from. So they all have the same, maybe, Hillsong worship style. And you don't see anything still from where they are from. It's like a soup. You mix all the ingredients, but you don't see the specific ingredients anymore.
Right.
A second step, which is an upgrade, I will say, is a multicultural church, which is a buffet. And, you can go to the church and you can enjoy the African way of doing worship, much more lively, going to the front for the offering, bringing your offering and dancing back to the row. That's already a big step, because now you are exposed to different cultures.
Yeah.
But we would say the third one is an intercultural church, and we compare that to a salad. And imagine that you are a kiwi and I'm an apple. Then I get something of the taste of your kiwi, and I give you something of the taste of my apple. But I still stay an apple, and you stay a kiwi. But we enrich each other, we enrich the flavor, we expose ourselves, and we say to other people, you are not just our guests, but we need you. Without you, we are not complete. This church is not just my church and you are my guest, but this is our church. And we both feel belongingness, and we both feel ownership. You know? Which I would say then, a church with intercultural people is more easy, of course. You just have them, but you don't work it out. But a church where you really are an intercultural church, you say that, I need the others to understand the richness of Christ. I need others to take away my own blinkers, my cultural blinkers. And as you understand, that's a whole way to grow. So that's why we have this arrow. Like, this is a growth process.
Right.
There's no one who has a Mark 10 intercultural church. It's always a journey. But if you understand that difference, then you realize, okay, I understand that we have to work on that. And it doesn't happen automatically.
Yeah.
We need intentionality.
That's a great picture. Yeah. So maybe let's go there a bit more. We talked about a lot of being intercultural now, but part of your book is being a missional community.
Yes.
Maybe just give us an idea of what a missional community is.
Yes. I would say a missional community is a community of, let's say, between 6 and 15 people who together open their hearts and their houses for others to be introduced to Christ, to see how can we be a blessing for others, how can we be a blessing for our neighborhood, and also how can we make this so simple that we can easily multiply, so that everyone is involved in the mission, but not everyone is called to be an evangelist. So, for example, if someone is very gifted in cooking, that person is as important in a missional community as an evangelistic person. So the evangelistic person can get the people in, but the good food keeps them in the community. So,
Yes.
and we need introverts. We need introverts with pastoral gifts.
Yeah.
Who can go for the long run with people. So we need the whole mix. And that's what I would say. That's the strength of a missional community. Like, it's simple, it's basic. You can do it in the houses. It doesn't cost any money. It's not. It's different maybe from the way that we used to think. At least I used to think about church.
So what's the difference? The difference between a church and a missional community?
Yeah, I would say there are many differences, and what I've seen of many of the European churches is that we end up being more consumers than being disciples. So when we are
Yes.
fed a lot in the churches and we want a good sermon and a good worship experience for ourselves, we are fed, and if we don't care, we are overfed.
Right.
And if you are being fed but you don't use that energy for action, what kind of Christians do you end up walking with? And I think especially in a post-Christian world like we are now in Germany and in Europe, we need to rethink, like, what is church like when we want to make disciples?
Right.
Ourselves, Christians, but also the newcomers. How do we make them disciples in an organic way, simple way, that also everyone can do it and everyone can be involved? So I would say a church that works with missional communities or with cells or whatever name you give it, has a very different structure. The focus will be more on the cells probably than on central gatherings, because they have its value, and I think we still should have them.
Yes.
But if we don't also have those small groups, we will miss out, or maybe on the essence of church. And that's also how the New Testament started, right? Like, if Paul wrote a letter to the Church of Romans, he probably wrote a letter to 5 house churches there, which were a collective unit, so to say. He didn't say to the 5 house churches in Rome. So they were one unit, but still that was the essence of church. And that is why it was growing so rapidly. And that is why the church in China grew so rapidly, when they got rid of the Western missionaries who thought about church traditionally, and they went back to only house churches. That is when they started to multiply. That is when they started to grow like crazy.
Yeah.
So I think we need to get some of that DNA back into our churches in Europe today.
So just for clarification, you don't say that the missional community is a church, but it's a vital or a very important and even overlooked part of what church should be.
Yeah, I will say that's a sensitive question, because it's about the definition. When is something a church?
Right.
And I do realize that a cell church has all the elements of a church. So you could call it a church. But I've also seen when a cell church or a cell group or a missional community stays on its own, and you say that's the church, and you don't have a collective, then you miss out on stability, on accountability, and on being complementary.
Oh, yeah.
So I will say there's a great need to connect the dots and to connect those cells and to help them to learn from each other, to celebrate together, to hear their stories. And those missional communities often are more homogeneous, certain neighborhood or
Sure.
so. If you have only that, don't have that many people who are different from you. And I think that's the secret of a church. Like when the church is too homogeneous, nothing is challenging me anymore.
Right.
I have the same people who look like me, who think like me, who have exactly the same doctrines as I have.
Yeah.
That is very different from meeting an Indian, Pentecostal and a Dutch Reformed Christian and being part of the same church.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful for both of them to learn from each other and to enrich their understanding of who Christ is and what Scripture is and who God is and how to walk with Him and live with Him.
So as you were talking, I noticed that there seems to be a force within the missional community to become more homogeneous over time.
Yes, absolutely.
So how do you stay purposely intercultural in your missional community? Because if you're not intentional, it will go away.
Yes. Yeah, so that means that in my own community, when there is an opportunity to involve someone from an other cultural background, I will use it.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I also realize I can never reach all of them in my community.
Right.
So what I need to do is I need to find key leaders or people of peace or
Right.
someone from another culture who can lead his own group.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
also why we use that picture of the wheel. Like a Chinese community, I think should be led by a Chinese because I can't read under the table into their culture in how things are done. So
Right.
I think the more ethnicities we have in our leadership, and the more we train people from other, ethnicities, but other layers of society too.
Right.
I cannot reach the hooligans in Rotterdam. I
Yeah.
can, but there are others who come from
Yeah.
that background. They can
Right.
do a much better
Yeah.
job there.
Yeah. So being intercultural is not only about different like languages or nationalities, but it's also about different like social levels within one country. Yeah. Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, that's why we don't use the word multi-ethnic, but the word intercultural, because it's not only the ethnicities, but it's
But
also
it's the
all the
culture.
layers in society that you
Yeah.
have.
Oh yeah, that's a really good point. So you told me everyone who can run a family can run a missional community.
Yes.
So tell me more about that.
Yeah. Yeah, you already used the analogy of having a child. We spoke already about that before. And I think that is so applicable to the way that you lead a community.
Right.
So if you can be a father and a mother and lead a family, which most of us in a reasonably good way can do, then you can also lead a community. It's a small group. It might cost you 4 to 6 hours per week. But it's doable because most of the time people eat already, so now they eat together. So you can also combine those things and do things that you are doing already. You can go to the park, but you can also invite others to go with you to the park.
Mm-hmm.
So if you learn to do that, I think you can quite easily do it. And to me, that's one of the advantages of a church that chooses to work with this way. I realize it's not the only way. There are many ways to plant churches. And I don't say this is the only way and it's always the best way.
Yeah.
But in my 25 years of experience, I have seen that in my context, it's the most fruitful way to go. And the advantage is otherwise you need an expensive church planter, maybe a budget of €100,000 for his salary and for the buildings. And now you can start with no money,
Yeah.
Normally it can be quite complicated to do it and you need to do a lot of administrative work in a church. And now it becomes really simple again.
Right.
It's relational. And I think relational evangelism, as far as I have seen it, works really best in the Western world.
Yes.
And you don't need the people with the very special gifts, the gifted theologians and pioneers, but everyone can do it. So yeah, that's why I would say everyone who can lead a family can also do this. The only thing that you need is have Jesus in your heart.
Mhm.
And even if you are not that missional and evangelistic, he is.
Yeah.
So when he lives in you, gives him some space, and then you give him space and ask him to train you, he will do it, and his spirit will do it.
Yeah. 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 I think that's such a good point, because I think the level of leadership we've seen in modern churches is through the roof. Is like really high. They could easily run a business, right?
Yes.
So and so many leaders in the church cannot run a business.
Mhm.
That's just not their thing, and that's all right. So they should not try or aspire to be a church like that.
Mhm.
And I think that the great thing about the missional community, or however you want to call it, is it's so easy. It's so it's easily multipliable, right?
That's it.
It's not. It's easy to understand,
Mm.
and it's easy to copy. So this lowers the level of leadership needed again, and makes it easier to for more people to step into this role of leadership.
Yes.
Because I don't think that I don't think that's a huge problem with modern churches. I think it's just way too difficult to do. And if we found a way to do it easier,
Mm.
it might help us, or it will help us to reach more people more effectively.
Yes, it's so true. And you know what's so encouraging to me, Daniel, is that I see that all over Europe, in so many places, people are thinking about this and asking, how can we do church different?
Yeah,
And we have new wine, and now we need new wineskins to
yeah,
contain the wineskin,
exactly.
that it will
Yeah,
not be spoiled.
yeah,
And I don't think this is something that we as humans make up and say, let's do church better. But I think the Spirit of God is hovering over His church and also inspiring us to think differently about those
yeah,
issues.
yeah, exactly.
And we have had a reformation of theology, and you Germans did a great job in that.
Well,
but
I wasn't involved at that time, but yeah, thank you.
but maybe now we need as much a reformation of church structures
Yes,
as we
yeah,
did of our theology.
I think so. Yeah. hmm So let's talk a bit about your book for the remainder of the time. In the book, you use the metaphor of climbing a mountain,
Hmm.
and you talk about 4 base camps.
Yes.
What is the idea behind those 4 steps?
Yeah. Now, when you look to that picture of the
hmm
mountain, you see that the first step is a missional lifestyle. And I think that missional lifestyle is really very important because if we don't live a lifestyle where we are used to invite people to our houses, and if we are not used to share our lives, then we cannot do anything else. So I have seen that to start there is really important. Like just recently I was in a church with 100 people, missional minded people, and I asked them, who of you over the last month have had someone in your house with whom you could have a cup of coffee or share a meal and introduce Christ to them? And Daniel, believe it or not, but from the 100 missional minded people, only 5 raised their hands.
Yeah.
So I would say that when that culture doesn't change, we cannot do the other steps. So that's why we start with missional lifestyle.
Yeah.
So we would say people train each other for some months, try to get 4 people together who are going to do this together. You need 4. When you have 1 or 2, it's too little. When one gets
Yeah.
sick or, something happens, then everything collapses.
Yeah. Yeah.
So start with at least 4 people and exercise together in that missional lifestyle. Start to pray for the people that don't know Jesus yet in your environment.
hmm
And then don't let it take too long. Then start an Alpha course or maybe Al Mazira course. Then you work with Muslims. But we will say Alpha is a really good tool. I'm a great fan of Alpha. I think I've done it 20 times at least. And by Alpha, we have seen that when Christians stay together and say later, when we are mature enough, we are going to do this, that often after 1 or 1.5 years, someone moves away to another house, and when are you ready enough to start with the mission?
Mm-hmm.
So we would say when you start with an Alpha course, you start with Christians, but also with seekers.
Right.
And it's good to have that incentive, Now you need to invite them, because otherwise you cannot start a good Alpha group. So, then you start Alpha. And I think the culture of Alpha has everything that you want to see in a missional community.
Mm-hmm.
It's having fun. It's having food. It is having joy together, sharing rooms together, sharing your living room. Because I would say preferably you do that in your houses, and not in an office or a church. And Alpha, you don't only listen to someone teaching and preaching, but you talk about it, and you have you have some good time after the Alpha course where you reflect on what you've learned, but also talk about many other things. So I would say Alpha has a culture that is exactly the culture that you want to have in your missional community and in your church. So, but then when Alpha is over, I think the worst thing you can do is stop that group, because you have already the nucleus of a missional community now.
Yes.
I think Alpha is, so to say, the launching rocket, to get it into orbit.
Yeah.
So we would say then go on with what we call Entdekkergroepen, the Discovery Bible Study groups.
Yeah.
Which is also used mightily by God's Spirit all over the world in disciple-making movements. It's a very simple tool to learn to read the Bible together, to hear God's voice, but not only listen, but also think about what are we going to do with that, and be accountable there. Mm-hmm. So you go on with having meals together, but now you change into a Bible study. So that's the third phase, and then that grows on into missionale Gemeinschaft, the missional communities. And that is more like you grow in community, you share birthdays together and celebrate them, but also you are missional. You are praying for each other's neighbors. You are regularly doing something for the people around you in your neighborhood, to bless the neighborhood. In that phase, when you keep the group open and the Lord blesses it, you could start all over again. You can multiply.
Right.
Imagine, Daniel, that someone has come to faith and they have seen you model doing it in your house, and now they open their house for you and they invite their relational network, and they are going to lead the next Alpha group, and as Christians you are going to support them to do it well. Backing them up. Man, that's discipleship. I would say that's one of the best ways to do discipleship. And to see how things can really work out in such a way that people get that missional DNA from scratch. And I think that the worst thing we can do is when someone comes to faith, is first tell them that now you need to be taught and you need to sit and we will teach you. The sooner you can activate that person to reach out to their network, but also participate in a group, the better it is. And we just started with an Alpha group 2 weeks ago in our house. And already then the people started to ask us, can we help you cook the food? Now, then you involve them from the beginning. So I would say, please, let's stop pampering people. Let's stop nurturing them too much. But let's also gradually expose them and let them do the work themselves. Involve them, give them ownership.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I've seen so many times people who are Christians coming to a new church, for example, and they have they have a really good job. They're overseeing people. They're responsible for a team of people, and they're coming to your church, and they're asking, well, I would like to help. What could I do? And you ask them, well, maybe could you clean up this room, or could you do this or that? That's like. Yeah, I mean that's necessary, and it shows a humble and serving spirit if they do, but they can do so much more, and that's trust them with doing much more than just that. Let's challenge people and give them actual responsibility to move things forward. That's such a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you see, Daniel, that this offers you a very simple structure. Like this is
Yes.
not a rocket science what we have done. We have just combined two mighty instruments that God's Spirit uses, Alpha and DBS.
Yeah.
We connected the dots, and we also realized like this is not a system or a model that has potential in itself. It's only when Jesus is in it and when His Spirit breathes life into it, and when we do this prayerfully, So
Yes.
let's not expect it from a good model, though we have seen good fruit of it, but let's expect from the living Jesus that He teaches us, how to do this well and how to adapt this to our own local situation.
And I think that's the other point that I thought was so interesting about this way is we've seen similar things happening with Rooted, right? So we've had people who had some core convictions and passions, and they started doing Rooted at their place, and groups started to form, and churches started to form. And I mean that was by accident, so some of the times, So that's I think there's some wisdom in that model that goes beyond the actual model, but there seems to be some core things behind that seem to be applicable in many ways. Yeah,
absolutely.
My question would be, if you could talk more about the step from the Entdeckergruppen to the missionale Gemeinschaften. So what's happening there? How's that different?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because that's like, how can you mark the difference? We would say when you make that step to people, you are really going to evolve them more. Like, to make more clear what I mean, like if you invite people to a missional community that doesn't know Jesus, they think like, wow, they will never do that. They don't know what they sign in for.
Right. Yeah.
If they sign in for a course like Alpha, it's much more easy. People sign in much more easily for projects in Europe than they do for very long commitments.
That's why Rooted works as well. Yeah.
Yes, that's why Rooted works, and other courses work also. So then, if you go to the Entdeckergruppe, people still think, okay, we add an extra course, an extra edition.
Right.
Now, in the missionale Gemeinschaft, you really start to help them understand this is actually church.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And if you want, you can be part of this. And together, we can become a movement.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to involve you and train you to be part of this. And we are going to look for how we can multiply this. So you bring a deeper level of community or church. You bring a deeper level of being missional, which is always counter-natural, So it's always difficult for people to learn that. So it's I would say it's a kind of intensifying what you are doing already. And it's really going from the phase of doing a course to becoming a community. And to help people understand what they are doing.
Yeah.
And I think that's mostly the difference.
Yeah. Awesome. So who should read the book?
I would say everyone who has a longing in their heart, like, how can the kingdom of God grow today?
Mm-hmm.
How can I be involved in that?
Yeah.
But also those who think like, I am limited. I cannot do this on myself. I want to be part of something that is bigger of myself, that can also grow beyond myself, which is not too dependent on me, but which I can also pass on to others, and which can go in different directions. So I would say everyone who says, I really long to see that New Testament vitality of church.
Right.
I really long to see people becoming disciples. I want to see that the mission for which Jesus gave his life is also taking place in my life. And I want to join him in that mission.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm ready to sacrifice my life for the one who sacrificed his life for me. I think people who somehow, to some extent, recognize that desire I think they can benefit a lot from this book.
Yes, that's great. So just for those who don't know, this book will be available on our website. We are going to put all the links and everything else into the description of the video, into the show notes. But there's more than just a book. Can you tell us a bit about Advance?
Yes, so we call this trail, we call it the Advanced Trail. And we also honestly tell people, we compare it to mountaineering, and mountaineering is not easy. So be aware, there will be spiritual fights, there will be battles, there will be setbacks. So if you want to have an easy, smooth life, don't start it, please. But if you say, I'm ready to pay that price and I'm ready to go that way, then we think it's not a good idea to do this on yourself and to just figure it out. We really need the body of Christ. We can make it ourselves. So we offer, when we have a group of 5 people who are doing this, we offer them the opportunity to come together 10 times for an online training. And in that online training, we help them, how to start doing that missional lifestyle. How do you do Alpha? How you invite people? How do you do the Alpha weekend? Let's exercise the Discovery Bible Study together. What does it mean to train your question, like to become a missional community? And multiplication, it never goes automatically. So how can we train each other? But also, let's share. What did you learn? What do you celebrate? Where are your setbacks? What can we pray for? Because never everything is going well. So we offer a kind of support for those who are doing it, that they can do it together, and that we answer each other's relational needs and the questions that we have, and really give each other the support that we all need.
Yes. So I think that's such a good thing, because we talk in the book. You talk about being in community, and going alongside each other, and then we sell the book to individuals. But we also would like to form a community for those people, to get connected, to work together, on this idea of forming missional communities who reach out to people for Jesus.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
And one thing, Daniel, is important. We can also do that in German. There are so many great things going on in Germany, and Henry Dietrich, who translated this, can be involved in it. David Kreuker, we mentioned his name already, is doing a good job. Piero Scarfolotto from Heige, that you had before in the podcast, he is amazing. What you are doing with Jungermacher is astonishing. So already many people are applying these principles, and I'm sure we will do this together. It's not just English. We will make it as much in the heart language as possible.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for writing the book. I'm really excited to hear what people take away from it. I think it's great. Is there anything else you would like to add about the book at this point?
Now, I would just like to say to the people who are watching it, we need so much to do this together. There's such a great need that we see more people who live estranged of Jesus, that they also will have the most beautiful encounter of the world with Him. Mm-hmm. And to be a Christian means to be a follower of the one who says, I came to seek and to save the lost. So I would say to anyone listening to this, watching to this, let's bow before Jesus, and let's together allow Him to do a deep work in our hearts, that then together we can see the church being revived and see new life into Germany, and to also see that huge wave of migrants, which is sometimes a great challenge, could also be a kind of wave that the Lord is sending to Germany today. Yeah. That if we take our board and sail that wave, that we will see Him do things that we could never imagine. And the most important thing I would like to say that it's not about what we can do for God, but it's all about what He can do through us. And what we can do for God is so limited. I am such a broken person. I'm a broken vessel. I can accomplish nothing. But what God can do through us, that is more than amazing. And the only thing that what He wants is that we are available for Him. And that He is the potter and we are the clay. And He can shape something amazing out of that clay that we are. So why not give in? Because we have nothing to lose in giving our lives for His cause.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much, Theo. That's a great way to talk about the book. Maybe to close our conversation off, if people would like to get to know more about you and what you do, where can they find more about you?
I would say please send an email to advance@m4-germany.eu.
Yeah.
I'm only there with a towel on my arm.
Mm-hmm.
So I will say to people, don't all come to me. I'm only there to serve you as Germans, So if we do this, there's one thing. We are going to walk with Germans. The Germans own this, and I'm going to be out of the way after some time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not about me, and it's not about being connected to me. It's all about being connected to Jesus together.
Yes.
And to be connected to His body, and then serve each other and learn together.
That's a great point. Thank you so much for you. So as we wrap up, is there anything that you would like to add that's open for you that we haven't covered yet?
Now, I just want to repeat what I've said already, like the Herrenhütters, which is a German movement, of course.
Yes.
When they left for the mission field, it's reported that then they had this slogan, and I love it so much. It says, the lamb that is slain is worthy to receive the reward of his suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why they did it. And that is why they even sometimes took their coffins as their suitcases, because they knew they would die, and lay down their lives for Him.
Yeah.
And I would say, let's serve the Lord in the attitude of the Herrenhütters, this mighty missional movements, and not forget that beautiful slogan.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Theo, for all your input and your ideas. It was great talking to you. I'm hoping a lot of people will read your book and profit from it. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, it's a great pleasure, Daniel. Thank you too.
Hey, danke, dass du bis zum Ende zugehört hast. Mich hat dieser Gedanke von Theo sehr angesprochen, dass es verschiedene Kulturen ja auch schon innerhalb einer Nation gibt. Also zum Beispiel in verschiedenen sozialen Schichten gibt es kulturelle Unterschiede. Damit ist eigentlich jede Gemeinde interkulturell. Nicht erst, wenn sie aus Menschen sehr verschiedener Nationen besteht. Und genau darüber spricht ja Galater 3 auch, wie alle Menschen unter dem Namen Jesu zusammenkommen. Und damit wird deutlich, welche große Bedeutung diese interkulturelle Fragen für Gemeinden eigentlich hat. Wenn euch diese Folge gefallen hat und ihr mehr hören wollt, dann bestellt doch direkt Theos Buch Interkulturelle Gemeinschaften gründen auf jünger-macher.de/Angebote. Einen Link dazu findet ihr auch in den Gesprächsnotizen. Wir sehen uns in der nächsten Folge. Bis dahin. Ciao.